Most people know what depression is. Almost everyone suffers from occasional depression with symptoms like sadness, pessimism, and low energy. It is only when depression lasts 2 weeks or more that it becomes a clinical disorder, at which point it is called major depression. It is important to understand that when someone has depression, there are actual physical changes in the structure of the brain, as well as reduced levels of important chemicals called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that allow communication between nerves, but they're also important for mood regulation. People suffering from depression typically have reduced levels of neurotransmitters, especially serotonin. Lower levels of serotonin lead to mood destabilization and depression. People suffering from depression can also have related changes in their brain structure. For example, people with a history of depression have a smaller hippocampus than others. This is significant because the hippocampus is an important serotonin receptor. Although people commonly think of depression as a single illness, there are actually several different types with different causes and treatments. One common type of depression is major depression. Symptoms often include overwhelming feelings of sadness, also low energy, and feelings of worthlessness. Another kind of depression, dysthymia, is a prolonged chronic condition with less severe symptoms than those of major depression. Although milder in nature, dysthymia does tend to last 2 years or longer. Adjustment disorder can occur in the aftermath of a sad or life-transitional event, like death of a loved one or the loss of a job. A period of unhappiness is normal, but if the depressed feelings continue for several months, then a diagnosis of adjustment disorder may be appropriate. One other common kind of depression is seasonal affective disorder, a pattern of depression related to a lack of exposure to sunlight. Typically, SAD sufferers notice symptoms during winter when days are shortest. However, they can often be helped with a light box that replaces lost sunlight. Good treatments exist for most kinds of depression, but self-diagnosis is tricky. If you think you're suffering from depression, the first step towards feeling better is to see a doctor.
I was working stupid numbers of hours a week. There was no way I could get off the treadmill whatsoever. I worked harder and harder. I did more and more hours. In the television channel's eyes, I would have been absolutely brilliant. But I was absolutely empty inside.
I would get an awful churning in my stomach, go over and over, and get clammy, sort of sweaty palms, and all the classic kind of anxiety symptoms, really. And to a greater or lesser extent, that's stayed with me for years.
There comes a time when the blankness of future is so extreme, it is such a black wall of nothingness, not even of bad things. It's not like there's a cave full of monsters that you're afraid of entering the future. It is just nothingness. Le néant, as the French would say, la vide, the void, the emptiness. And it is just horrible.
Most people feel gloomy, worn out, or disconnected from life at one time or another. But when these feelings continue nearly every day for 2 years or more, you may be suffering from chronic depression.
What differentiates chronic depression, also called dysthymia or dysthymic disorder, from major depression is that symptoms are less severe and often persist for several years. People with chronic depression typically function adequately in everyday activities, yet feel continually unhappy and unable to live life to its fullest. It's estimated that chronic depression affects more than 10 million Americans annually. Many celebrities, including Jim Carrey, Drew Barrymore, Harrison Ford, Hugh Laurie, and Sheryl Crow, have spoken openly about coping with ongoing depression. The exact cause of chronic depression is not known. However, as in major depression, it's believed to involve changes in the brain that result in reduced levels of brain chemicals called neurotransmitters, especially serotonin, which helps regulate mood and emotions. Chronic depression may develop in response to significant life stressors, such as the loss of a loved one, a violent or otherwise traumatic event, severe financial or relationship problems, or difficulties at work. It may also be caused by certain chronic illnesses, such as AIDS, cancer, Parkinson's disease, as well as by long-term use of some medications. Studies suggest that a family history of any depressive, anxiety, or bipolar disorder can also increase the likelihood of developing chronic depression. Chronic depression often begins with vague feelings of sadness and emptiness that gradually multiply, and it can start in childhood or adulthood and occurs more often in women than in men. The primary hallmark of chronic depression is a persistently low, dark, or sad mood accompanied by chronic lack of pleasure in daily life. It also is not uncommon for sufferers to experience a major depressive episode called double depression, especially if chronic depression goes untreated. No two people experience chronic depression exactly the same way, but most struggle with the same symptoms that characterize major depression, but with less severity. These symptoms may include feelings of hopelessness, fatigue, insomnia, or excessive sleeping, poor concentration, appetite changes, and low self-esteem. Several of these symptoms must be present for at least 2 years in adults, 1 year in children, to meet the criteria for a diagnosis of chronic depression.
The National Institute of Mental Health attests that 18% of Americans suffer from anxiety disorders. Another 7% suffer from major depression, and countless individuals have both.
Although they often occur hand in hand, anxiety and depression are different mental illnesses. People with anxiety disorders find that their near constant fears and worries make it hard to lead a normal life. They may also experience physical symptoms like muscle tension, headaches, stomach aches, and heart palpitations. Meanwhile, a person with a depressive disorder is regularly burdened by a feeling of hopelessness, insignificance, and despair. Lethargy, severe fatigue, and various aches and pains are physical symptoms that may accompany depression. In most cases, where depression and anxiety occur simultaneously, anxiety sets in first. That may be because people with anxiety disorders spend a great deal of time in an agitated, tense, and uneasy state. This can take a huge emotional toll, causing a person to become clinically depressed. On the flip side, a depressed person may spend a great deal of time worrying, which can in turn lead to anxiety. There also seems to be a genetic connection between anxiety and depression. Research indicates that both disorders occur with more frequency in people who have a first-degree relative with mental illness. That's bad news, because when symptoms of depression and anxiety occur together, they are often more severe than when the conditions manifest separately. Plus, depression that is exacerbated by anxiety is more likely to lead to suicide than depression on its own. While this is disturbing, there are effective treatments available for both depressive and anxiety disorders. Often, antidepressants can help ease emotional symptoms of both conditions. And participating in long-term talk therapy can also produce great results. If you or someone you love seems plagued by feelings of depression, anxiety, or both, talk to a therapist.
Remember, depression is an illness. It can be treated to change a sad, colorless, unhappy life into one with energy and enjoyment.